You could say that America and her railroads grew up together. As the railroads pushed ahead, settlers followed.
Some people are called to a specific mission in life. Steve Little's calling came disguised as the sound of a train threading its way through the Swannanoa Gap.
What an ethereal sound that is. It's sort of a slow motion kind of a sound as it goes, and I'm thinking, where is it going? What are they going to be doing? Where did they come from? And I would think about things like that, and I wanted to know.
As it happens, this is where all of that led, to Andrews Geyser, just outside of Old Fort. Now today, the geyser's kind of having a bad day, but normally it shoots 50 to 100 feet in the air. The track that once carried the train of Little's youth loops around and above the monument, offering a clue as to how a canny civil engineer conquered the Blue Ridge Escarpment.
This is one of the kind of an iconic site for railroad people, because what was once called the Western North Carolina Railroad makes 3 loops coming up the mountain here. So it comes up the mountain, it loops around here, comes around behind us, and then makes another loop going on up the mountain so they can maintain a grade so that a locomotive can make it up the mountain.
A serpentine route that proved experts wrong, opened Western North Carolina to the world, and left a tragic legacy that has yet to be completely unearthed. After the Civil War, the North Carolina legislature committed state money to continue the westward expansion of rail service beyond the Blue Ridge.
Well, about that time, the 2 top leaders of the Western North Carolina Railroad Company, which was in charge of the construction through a state contract, embezzled right at $2 million. It was the entire budget for the construction of the railroad. Going up the mountain,
they laid a few substandard miles of track before making off with most of the funds.
When they embezzled the money, the state was basically busted financially.
The state ultimately bought the meager railroad assets at auction. They tapped a talented engineer, Major James W. Wilson, to figure out how to vault the Blue Ridge. His solution to constructing the train track from Henry Station, just west of Old Fort, to the top of the escarpment was a circuitous 8.4-mile route that looped back on itself multiple times to avoid the steepest terrain. Even so, some sections of the Blue Wall could only be overcome by blasting 7 tunnels through solid granite using a new and highly unstable explosive, nitroglycerin. The unheralded labor carried out by the railroad workers remains a staggering achievement. Because of the cash-strapped condition of the Treasury, they chose to use convict labor to continue laying track. Many of the prisoners, 95% of whom were black, were convicted on flimsy charges and sentenced to 5 years of hard labor solely to provide manpower for the railroad project.
Many of these individuals had been enslaved prior to the war, and here was a way that they saw that they could not only control a population that they wanted to control, but also generate revenue for the state.
Convict leasing was common at the time, an early example of the oppressive Jim Crow laws that haunted black people in the South for almost a century. In all, more than 3,000 men and several hundred women were sent from the penitentiary in Raleigh to build the railroad, cook, and maintain the work camp.
So it was not a good chapter in our history, but one that we need to remember.
On March 11, 1879, Wilson wired Governor Zebulon B. Vance that daylight entered Buncombe County today through the Swannanoa Tunnel. The first train chugged through the tunnel on the way to Asheville a year and a half later.
It was a wonderful thing for Western North Carolina. It opened up the region in all sorts of ways to industry and commerce, to tourism. Growth was tremendous in the aftermath of the completion of the railroad, but again, it was an extremely high cost that people tended to ignore and kind of sweep under the rug.
Wilson teamed up with the railroad executive Alexander Boyd Andrews to build the 5-story Round Knob Hotel alongside the tracks near Old Fort. Nearby, they created a spectacular fountain. The Round Knob Hotel thrived until it was destroyed by a fire in 1903. Nature reclaimed the site of the hotel and the fountain until George Fisher Baker, a banker, philanthropist, and one of the richest men in America at the time, stepped in. He resolved to have it restored. He deeded the fountain to Southern Railway, which had purchased the railroad, and renamed it Andrews Geyser to honor his friend and fellow railroad board member. His one stipulation? Southern Railway must care for the fountain in perpetuity. Within half a century, despite Southern Railway's promises, nature triumphed a second time. Enter Steve Little.
When I discovered the fountain, when I was 15, I was just blown away.
He went looking for the deed to the Andrews Geyser and discovered the perpetual care clause upon which George Fisher Baker had insisted. Ultimately, Southern Railway deeded the fountain to the town, which happily embraced the obligation to care for it in 1976. Over the years, Little and Pierce's fascination with the rail line continued. In 2021, Pierce suggested that they form an organization to create a memorial to the men and women who built the railway. The Rail Memorial Project was born. In October 2021, members of the nonprofit gathered on the grounds of Andrews Geyser to dedicate a monument crafted by Paul Twitty II, an Old Fort Mason with ties to the railroad.
It shows them how the country was built. The people that worked on it, that nobody knew anything about. I mean, at a day's time, there'd be about 500 men out here working on the railroad, not counting the ladies that came up here that was incarcerated just to take care of them and fix the meals and stuff. A lot happened here, and it needs to be remembered, and our young kids need to know it. We're Americans. We all worked here together, everywhere all over the country. And I think we should remember that.
Even though the memorial was created almost 150 years after the railroad was built, the words of poet and author Clint Smith speak to the efforts by Rail Project volunteers to recall the sacrifices of those who were for so long forgotten. No stone in the ground can make up for a life, and yet we must try to honor those lives and to account for this history as best we can. It is the very act of attempting to remember that becomes the most powerful memorial of all. If you enjoyed this video, we're making a whole slew of these hidden history stories right here on our YouTube channel. So subscribe for more. Visit ourstate.com/subscribe and enter promo code Hidden History to become a subscriber today and receive your first issue of Our State magazine.